After years of being in love, my boyfriend's heart changed. He and his lover had their affair in my car, and in the heat of passion, even had the nerve to compare me to her. Realizing my $3 million luxury car had been defiled, I decided to destroy it. And along with it, their lives. Chapter 1. When I realized Andy was cheating, I was just about to take him home to meet my parents. As soon as I got in the car, I smelled a strong rose fragrance, something cheap and overpowering, nothing like the perfumes on my vanity. I stayed calm and said to Andy, who had just opened the driver's side door, "Andy, I think I left the air conditioning on in the study. Could you go check?" Andy was momentarily taken aback, but then smiled indulgently, calling me a scatterbrain as he headed toward the elevator. As soon as he stepped into the elevator, I quickly dropped my affectionate facade, turned on the dashcam, and fast-forwarded through the recordings from my last use of the car until today, skipping the mundane commutes. Finally, I found what I was looking for. The day after I went on a business trip, Andy bought a bouquet of roses from a flower shop and went to work. He worked late that night, and when he finished, a stunning woman was with him. They kissed passionately in front of the car, and Andy even pushed her onto the hood, kissing her while his hand slid under her clothes. Eventually, he picked her up and got into the car. The dashcam began to shake violently, the sounds of their affair unmistakable. I can hardly describe how I felt watching that. Shock and sadness lasted only a moment before nausea and frustration set in. This woman and Andy clearly hadn't just started their affair, but I had been completely oblivious, letting them desecrate my car. "Abby, you've really let your guard down in this relationship." I berated myself. Still lost in self-loathing, I saw the elevator doors open and quickly turned off the video, resuming my seat. "Baby, the air conditioning was off. How are you going to make it up to me for making me go all the way up there?" Andy teased, leaning in for a kiss. Normally, I would have returned his affection, but thinking about the video made me instinctively lean back and turn my head away. Noticing my hesitation, Andy looked puzzled, then slightly annoyed, but he didn't say anything as he buckled his seatbelt. I thought for a moment, then pulled a candy from my bag, unwrapped it, and offered it to him. "Here's a candy to make it up to you. After dinner with my parents tonight, I'll make it up to you in other ways." Hearing that he was going to meet my parents, his mood immediately brightened, though he still pretended to be reluctant, pouting as he took the candy. On the drive, the thought of what had happened in the car made the cheap rose scent seem even stronger, and the seat, tainted by their affair, felt filthy. I decided then that I would have the car destroyed. Andy was in a great mood, and even when I rolled down the windows for fresh air, he didn't complain about the wind affecting his concentration. I knew exactly why he was happy. He thought he had secured a future with me, and by marrying me, he could climb the social ladder through my family. Little did he know, that ladder would be the noose for his downfall. Chapter 2. When we got home, my parents greeted us at the door. I ran into their arms joyfully, completely ignoring Andy behind me. It wasn't until Andy cleared his throat and called my name that I introduced him to my parents. "Mom, Dad, this is my boyfriend Andy. He works at Mountain Peak Investment Bank." Before I could finish, Andy eagerly extended his hand to my father. I exchanged a glance with my mother, and we silently agreed not to say anything. Inside, I loudly instructed the driver to park the car in the garage for maintenance the next day. Meanwhile, I quietly whispered to him, "Copy the dashcam footage from June 21st and send it to my brother. Don't tell anyone." The butler glanced at my cold expression, then at Andy, who was chatting away with my parents, and knowingly nodded before taking the keys and leaving. I didn't want to keep up the charade of affection with Andy, so I dragged my mother to see the new collection we had recently acquired. She playfully chided me for being childish but indulged me nonetheless. As soon as we entered the collection room, my mother got straight to the point. "So, what's wrong with your boyfriend?" "He cheated," I said while admiring a piece from the collection. "Do you have proof?" she asked, gently stopping my hand from touching the items. I nodded. "Crystal clear. I've asked Mr. Smith to send the footage to John." Satisfied, she asked, "How angry do you think your father will be?" I thought for a moment. Angry enough to slap any ant that crosses his path. During dinner, my brother didn't come home, but I received a barrage of messages on my phone. I didn't need to look to know he was cursing Andy. After dinner, my mother used the excuse of wanting to spend time with me to keep me home, while Andy looked at me expectantly, clearly hoping I'd invite him to stay the night. I pretended not to understand and cheerfully waved him off, informing him that my car needed maintenance, so the driver would take him home. I'd drive a different car to pick him up from work the next day. Andy's face darkened, but he forced a smile and said goodbye. As he got into the car, he turned back and waved his phone at me, indicating he wanted to talk later. Nothing left to discuss except your fate, I thought, turning away as the driver impatiently honked the horn. Not long after, my brother John came home. We gathered in the study, and my father watched the dashcam footage with a puzzled expression. His face contorted with anger, his chest heaving as he pointed at the screen and cursed. "Shameless!" My mother calmly soothed him while my father, with tears in his eyes, promised to get justice for me. "Sweetheart, tell me, how many times do you want him to suffer? I've told you before, we're not the mafia." I sighed. Then, changing my tone, I said, "But tomorrow is the Mountain Peak Investment Bank's anniversary gala. We should give our newly appointed manager a special gift." Chapter 3. But he never confessed his feelings to me again, not until 3 years later, on the day he closed his first $1 million deal. That day marked exactly 3 years since his first confession. After returning from his business trip, Andy rushed over to see me right after getting off the plane. Holding up the signed contract, he smiled and asked, "Abby, am I impressive or what?" I laughed and told him he was amazing. His eyes curved with joy, full of pride and love. "Well, can we be together now? If not, I'll get an even bigger deal and come back to ask you again." And so, that day marked not only the first step in Andy's career but also the first day of our relationship. Andy was a great boyfriend. He once told me, "Abby, I will never let you down." I believed him because the love I felt at that time was undeniably real. But I had forgotten one thing. Forever only means forever in that moment, not in the years to come. The next morning, I looked at my swollen, exhausted reflection in the mirror and sighed deeply. My brother stood at the bedroom door, glaring at me in disappointment. "Look at you. I've booked you an appointment with the beautician. You must dazzle everyone tonight, got it?" he said, walking over to massage my shoulders. "Abby, we grieve for one night. Any more, and it's a waste of time." I nodded mechanically and said, "I understand, but if you keep pressing, my bones are going to break." Chapter 4. For the evening's anniversary gala, I planned to send the driver to pick up Andy, while I would go with John. When I opened my chat with Andy, I found a barrage of messages, all filled with complaints. He grumbled about how I hadn't introduced him to my parents right away and how I didn't invite him to stay over. Altogether, there were 40 or 50 messages. At the end, he said, "I'm going to the gala with my colleagues. You and your driver can come into cars to pick me up." I looked at John and asked, "Do you think it's possible he's been replaced? How else could someone change so much in just 5 years?" John ruffled my hair and said, "He's seen a lot of things since graduating, things that can turn an ambitious person into someone disheartened and can change a pure heart into one that's opportunistic. You've been with him long enough for him to lose that sense of novelty and the desire to win you over. You've gone from being his unattainable sun to a simple light bulb necessary in the dark, but surplus in the daylight. You remember all the good parts of him, unconsciously ignoring the changes until reality hit, making him feel like a stranger now." I pouted, unconvinced, and sent Andy a reply. "I'm going with my brother tonight, and the driver is taking us. Figure out your own way there." Then I handed my phone to John and decided not to think about it anymore. It wasn't until after the red carpet event that Andy finally arrived with his colleagues, fashionably late. He immediately spotted me standing with John in the crowd, and with his date on his arm, stormed toward us. But when he saw I was talking to a foundation director, his expression changed, and he awkwardly inserted himself into our conversation. Once the director left, Andy's face shifted again, frowning at me as if I had committed some grave mistake. John, unfazed, stepped in front of me, towering over Andy. "Mr. Lin, is there an issue?" Under the weight of John's presence, Andy's expression wavered. However, his date, quick to adapt, approached me with a friendly smile. "Miss Song, Mr. Lin has spoken so much about you. It's a pleasure to finally meet you." I had been zoning out, but now I focused on her. How coincidental that she was the same woman from that video. She didn't seem bothered by my silence and continued. "I'm Andy's assistant, Emily. You wouldn't believe how much I suffer from him showing off about you." "And how does he show off?" I cut her off abruptly, a playful smile creeping onto my face. "I'm curious what Andy says about me." Emily hesitated, unable to answer immediately. But I didn't press her, I already knew how they talked about me. I remembered the woman in the video, her voice teasing. "Andy, who's better, me or the princess?" Andy laughed and said, "Abby's always been boring, she's got nothing on you." Then the unmistakable sounds of their intimacy followed. The more I thought about it, the more disgusted I became, and I could barely keep my expression in check. I looked them both over with clear disdain, making Andy's face twitch with embarrassment. Still, with John present, Andy forced a smile and nervously asked, "Abby, are you misunderstanding something? Emily just came in with me because you weren't there. It won't happen again." I scrutinized his face. Beneath his obsequious expression, I saw his irritation and humiliation. Suddenly, I found all of this so tiresome. "Andy," I said calmly. "Even a $3 million car's hood isn't comfortable to lie on, is it?" Chapter 5. Andy froze for a moment, then realized what I meant, his expression turning ashen. You know?" I scoffed. The cheap perfume gave it away. "You know I can't stand strange smells." The lights in the venue dimmed as the executives prepared to deliver their speeches. Ignoring Andy and Emily, I walked towards our reserved seats with John, deliberately pausing to enjoy Emily's panicked yet slightly triumphant expression. "Emily, right?" John said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "I wonder if the money you got from Andy is enough to cover Mountain Peak's penalties." Emily didn't understand but sensed the threat in John's words. I watched as her smugness vanished, replaced by fear. The rest of the event went smoothly. Surrounded by elite socialites, we watched Andy and Emily's increasingly anxious expressions. Whenever an executive approached them, they broke out in a cold sweat, and Emily looked on the verge of tears, making the executives visibly uncomfortable. I raised my glass to hide my malicious smile, savoring the feeling of having his fate in my hands. Andy never truly understood me. He didn't realize how much I valued family interests, enough not to cause a scene at Mountain Peak's event. My goal tonight was simply to unsettle them. Andy tried several times to approach me, but the people around me deterred him. He feared who else might know about his and Emily's sordid affair, afraid of the strange looks he might receive if he entered my circle. Over the years, he had grown accustomed to being flattered and couldn't handle the scrutiny. John was right. 20-year-old Andy was sincere and worthy of my love, but 27-year-old Andy was a decaying mess. And filth didn't belong in my sight. I signaled to a waiter who approached with a tray. John placed 2 wristbands on it, instructing the waiter. "Give these to the couple over there, from Mr. Zhu." As the waiter walked away, one of my friends, Leo, who had been eavesdropping, chimed in. "I'm all ears. Do tell." After I briefly explained Andy's situation, Leo rolled his eyes dramatically. "If I'd known you'd give those to such trash, I would have used toilet paper instead." Leo was a party enthusiast, always preparing an after-party for our group of friends and occasionally using it to resolve family disputes. I hadn't planned to use it, but life is unpredictable. Though I wouldn't cause a scene at Mountain Peak, my retribution wouldn't end here. Perfect timing," Leo said, raising his glass towards the couple, now excitedly clutching their wristbands. "Zhu's brother is back. You two haven't seen each other in years." I was startled, the long-forgotten face coming into focus. Zhu's younger brother, Richard, had been abroad for years. He was my childhood friend. Chapter 6. The after-party was on the rooftop of the gala venue. After the event, I went to my room to change and retrieve my phone. When I turned on my phone, over 99 messages buzzed, making me toss it onto the couch. The phone rang and I covered it with a record, then leisurely took off my makeup, showered, and changed. As I sat down to apply makeup, I finally answered. "Abby! Let me explain." Andy's annoying voice blared. "I'm all ears." I replied indifferently. Andy paused, not expecting my response, then hurriedly said, "Emily and I were just playing along. I only love you. She's the illegitimate daughter of the CEO of King Cloud Pharmaceuticals. There are rumors she and her mother will soon be legitimized. You know how long I've been chasing that partnership. This was a risky move, but necessary. You know my ambitions and goals. Everything I've done is to be worthy of you. I know you're upset, but if you give me a chance, I'll..." "Hold on," I interrupted. "I have another call. We'll continue this later." Before he could respond, I hung up and answered Richard's video call. "What's your room number?" Richard asked, holding a bag of bubble tea. When Richard sat beside me, handing me the bubble tea, it hit me that we hadn't seen each other in 5 years. He'd grown taller and more muscular since moving to Europe. While I was picturing him slapping Andy from Dragon City to Europe, Richard ruffled my hair, speaking gently. "Leo told me everything. You've been through a lot, my little son." Hearing this, I pouted, exaggerating Andy and Emily's betrayal, feeling increasingly wronged. I pointed at Richard. "Go beat them up." I was surprised at my own words, a remnant of childhood. But Richard smiled, saying, "Of course. I'll do it until you're happy. Just like when we were kids." I laughed, clinking my bubble tea with his soda. Welcome home, Richard. Chapter 7. As I applied makeup, Richard and I caught up on our lives over the past 5 years. A call reminded us we were 10 minutes late for Leo's after party. Leo was a punctual party enthusiast. If you were late, you'd either drink a penalty shot or make a round of apologies. I sped up my makeup routine while Richard helped with my jewelry, then we hurried to the entrance, just in time. As I prepared to comment on our close call, Andy and Emily also arrived. Emily, clearly out of place in her evening gown, was drawing stares from the casually dressed guests and security. Andy, familiar with these events, wore clothes I had bought him, quickly dropping Emily's hand to eagerly approach me. Richard stepped in, blocking his view. Seeing John and Leo waving at me, I pulled Richard toward them, ignoring Andy's attempt to speak. Emily hobbled behind Andy, having twisted her ankle when he discarded her. "Thick-skinned," Leo remarked. John laughed. "Maybe they think Abby's a fool, hoping to win her over with some grand gesture." I rolled my eyes, catching sight of Emily approaching. Before I could speak, she knelt in front of me, pleading, "Miss Song, please spare me." My brothers and Richard immediately shielded me. Emily continued, "My parents and I have just become a family. Please don't let my father kick us out. I know I was wrong to fall for Andy. Just show mercy, and I'll disappear from your life." I listened to her sob story and glanced over at the woman sitting on the sofa, watching the drama unfold with an amused smile. She was the legitimate daughter of the CEO of King Cloud Pharmaceuticals and the new head of the company, Nancy. Nancy had just taken over, and I had sent her the recorded conversation earlier. 10 minutes later, King Cloud's official social media announced a change in the board of directors. Emily, however, was still in the dark and dreaming of her new status. "You're begging the wrong person," I said, pointing towards Nancy. "She's the one you should be talking to. But no worries, you can start with me." I continued. After all, we have some unfinished business. Turning to Andy, who stood by, trying to maintain an air of innocence, I added, "You might want to join her. It'll make you look like the star-crossed lovers you pretend to be." Chapter 8. The party music had long since quieted, and the room buzzed with laughter and whispers as people watched the drama unfold. Andy, trying to keep his composure, gave me a heartbroken look and turned to leave, but my friends blocked his path. The screen behind us came to life, showing the dashcam footage of Andy and Emily's indiscretions. The crowd collectively gasped in disgust, and someone jeered. "Abby, your car's been defiled." "Indeed," I replied with a smile. "Which is why I decided to have it destroyed. Trash belongs in the trash." Laughter erupted around the room. As the footage continued, showing their intimate moments, Emily broke down in tears, and Andy, enraged, screamed my name, his voice full of hatred. I remained seated, calmly saying, "I told you to beg. Maybe I'd have shown mercy." The footage switched to photos taken by the private investigator my brother had hired. They showed Andy and Emily holding hands and kissing, as well as Emily visiting Andy's place after he returned alone last night. As the final images disappeared, Emily fainted, and Nancy nonchalantly ordered her to be removed. Andy, looking defeated, glared at me with a mix of rage and desperation. "Abby, you ruined me. You think Emily was the first? She was just one of many. You think you're so high and mighty, but you're just a used woman. Who'd want you now?" He panted, struggling against the hands holding him, and finally spoke with a bitter edge. "I always hated your superior attitude. No matter how hard I tried, I could never reach you. You're born with everything I had to fight for, and now you can just crush me with a snap of your fingers. Why? Just because you were born lucky? If I had your start, would you still say I'm wrong?" "Yes, I would," I said firmly. "Don't get it twisted. We hold everyone accountable, regardless of background, gender, or orientation. Andy, you once promised to prove your worth to match my family's standing, and now you blame me for being out of reach? Isn't it a bit late for that? You tried to justify your actions by blaming your origins, but the truth is, you did this because you're a terrible person. Andy, do you remember the person you were at 20? Would that person recognize you now?" Chapter 9. The party ended, and so did Andy and Emily's hopes. I sent the footage and photos to Mountain Peak's CEO after the gala. That same night, all traces of Andy and Emily vanished from the company's platforms. I sold the house I shared with Andy and moved back home, resuming my life as usual. The public only knew about the change in leadership at King Cloud Pharmaceuticals. Emily and her mother faded into obscurity. Leo continued to host his parties, and we attended with pleasure, never mentioning that night's events. Richard and I returned to our pre-relationship dynamic, bantering and secretly competing in our careers. John watched our petty squabbles, excelling far beyond us. One day, after returning from the gallery, I found Richard waiting for me in the living room. His first words were, "Marry me?" I paused, then asked, "Why?" Our galleries and auction houses can maximize their potential together. Plus, a family alliance would help expand our European ventures. "Why us? Isn't Leo the eldest?" "Because I handle European affairs and—" He hesitated, then smiled, his gaze intense. "I have a personal interest. I want to be close to you." Whenever we dated others, we severed contact to avoid any misunderstandings. I assumed Richard felt the same, never expecting he harbored feelings for me. We were so familiar, like family. Developing romantic feelings seemed awkward, like holding your own hand. "I don't love you," I confessed. "I know," Richard said without flinching. "But I need a way to make you consider me. A business proposal is more efficient than a love confession. Let's marry first and fall in love later." "Marry first? Have you been reading romance novels?" I joked, but his unwavering gaze made me reconsider. He smiled, changing the subject. Marry me. If you find someone else, we can divorce. But until then, let's take it slow. His proposal was tempting. I had no romantic attachments, and our partnership was advantageous. I sighed, ready to agree but wanting to tease him. But he said I'm tainted. Richard brushed off my melodrama, saying, "If sleeping with one man makes a woman tainted, then it's the man who's the dirt. Why care about his words?" His logic was flawless, and I lost my momentum. Chapter 10. I thought I'd never see Andy again, but after Richard and I announced our engagement, photos of Andy and me during happier times surfaced online. Paired with sad music and comparisons to my engagement photos with Richard, imaginative minds spun a tale of a love triangle. Both our company's official accounts quickly issued clarifications, insisting our engagement was mutual. Yet some rebellious netizens believed it was a cover-up, creating two main narratives. 1. Richard had forcibly taken me from Andy, using family influence to break us up and force a business marriage. Their proof: my slightly red eyes in the engagement photo, supposedly from crying. In reality, it was from staying up late reading romance novels. The second narrative painted me as a merciless heartbreaker who discarded Andy for a convenient family alliance. No real evidence, just speculation. Either way, Andy was portrayed as the innocent victim, torn from his true love by societal forces. It was low-level drama, easily debunked by releasing the evidence I had. But Andy's goal wasn't just the drama, he aimed to profit from the attention. He started live streaming, recounting our relationship, ignoring the initial flood of insults. He described his efforts to win me over and how unattainable I seemed. Sympathetic viewers reassured him. No matter how high she was, she still fell for you. Andy, lost in thought, murmured, "How could the sun fall? I merely basked in its light for a time." I shuddered, remarking to Richard, "He's such a romantic fool." Richard scoffed, typing a comment. "If you're such a great actor, you should have joined Hollywood, not an investment bank." Amidst the insults, some supportive comments emerged, forming a small fan base. They argued, "He deserves a second chance. Sure, he made mistakes, but are Abby and Richard blameless? Their engagement was suspiciously soon after the breakup." Exactly. Maybe they conspired to frame Andy. With their wealth and power, they could easily ruin an ordinary person. Amused, I screenshot the comments and posted them on social media with the caption, "The internet is truly amazing." Chapter 11. The next day, we sued the live streaming platform for defamation. If you can't control your falsehoods, we'll let the law handle it. Ultimately, we won the case, and shortly after, the platform sued Andy for damaging their reputation. Being kind-hearted, I sent our family's legal team to assist the platform. They gratefully accepted, remembering how the same team had just stripped them of their assets. The following summer solstice, Richard and I hosted a grand wedding in Dragon City. At the ceremony, Richard's hand was sweaty but firm, his eyes red with emotion and filled with love and satisfaction. His tears fell on my bouquet as he recited his vows, abandoning his prepared speech. "Abby, my dear son, I've waited so long for this moment. I love you, your eternal brilliance. It's a beauty that can't be hidden. I'm the moon reflecting your light. I'll always need you, even if you don't need me. Please love me. If not, at least use me. As long as you keep shining on me." His overwhelming love made my heart race. I wanted to discern if it was love, but remembering his words about having time, I smiled and replied, "Be my Icarus. Even if you fall, run towards me without hesitation."